Ever since ideas have been expressed, they have been censored. Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China ordered the burning of all philosophy and history texts and live burial of intellectuals who disagreed with his government, beginning in 213 BC. During World War II, Hitler ordered huge book burnings of anything that contradicted the Nazi ideology. Even modern books often have words blacked out or passages censored. Book banning and book censorship are essentially the censoring, removal, or destruction of books and texts that conflict with an individual, group, or government's views, whether it is too violent, too sexual, or contradicts their family, religious, or patriotic values. These issues are exactly what provoked the Kanawha County textbook war. 1973 was an interesting year. It was the year of the Watergate scandal. The year construction was begun on the Twin Towers, and only 5 years before, Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. 1973 was also the year the Kanawha County textbook war began. Kanawha County occupies the southwestern part of West Virginia. The state capital, Charleston, is located there. The majority of Charleston residents had a decent education. Most graduated from high school, and many attended college. The same could not be said for the population of rural Kanawha. Many did not even have a high school diploma. These so-called valley folk made less money than those in Charleston. They also had very different views on religion, family, and politics. The people of rural Kanawha had a strong fundamentalist faith, and were often the butt of cruel jokes. One reporter described the difference between city people and country people as the difference between people who believe in books and people who believe in the book. If you were to trace the Kanawha War to its very roots, you would find the debate over race. In the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. and other Black Americans campaigned for desegregation and equal rights, changes that had an especially large impact on schools. In the years following, the term multiculturalism gained precedence. Before, schools had used books that portrayed mostly white children in stereotypical settings. In 1965, the government passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provided money to schools so that they could change their curriculums to incorporate these new multicultural ideas. Kanawha received some of this money to update their outdated textbooks. These textbooks were required by law to incorporate these new multicultural ideas. Another new approach in these textbooks was dialectology. The point of dialectology was to use the natural dialect the children spoke in to make them understand the text better, instead of using formal English. Many educators agreed with this approach, and it was incorporated into the school curriculum and textbooks. Alice Moore, however, disagreed. She believed children should be taught proper English and, quote, not dem and dat. This was new. Usually an ordinary community member wouldn't object to a school board decision. In the words of Russ Isaacs, a member of the Kanawha County Board of Education, why not leave it up to the professionals? I mean, what are we paying these people to do?
Better way than the way we've been doing it.
Miss Moore was what you might call one of the valley folk. She didn't have a college degree and was fundamentally religious, wife of a pastor and mother of 3. Mrs. Moore had been concerned with the introduction of sex education into schools for some time, and now she had found a new cause. She believed that the so-called radical left was trying to infiltrate American schools to brainwash children. To her, the multiculturalism and dialectology approaches were a cover-up for the liberal agenda. The board eventually came to the decision that they would hold off on purchasing the textbooks until they were reviewed in detail. After the meeting, Moore was shown a passage from the autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a Black Christian who converted to Islam and became a spokesman for the religion. The passage she showed him was this. Moore was flabbergasted. She requested the textbooks be sent to her house for review, and so they were, all 300 plus of them. Over time, Moore skimmed the books and became increasingly uncomfortable. She had objected to grammar before. Now she found a host of other apparent, vulgar, anti-American, and anti-Christian issues. 4-letter words, sexually suggestive works, and memoirs by objectionable African Americans. Alice Moore decided to spread the word. And word did spread, through newspapers, through pamphlets, through the network of stay-at-home mothers. The next board meeting attracted thousands, filling the building and spilling outside. Alice brought along copies of the textbooks with highlighted offensive passages. Moore brought up everything from race to sexuality, and especially the role of children to question their parents' beliefs. Alice Moore was afraid of schools taking the parents' proper role, the role of telling their children what to believe. Was the school supposed to tell children to believe what they wanted to be free thinkers? This was the big question. Who has the right to tell children what to think? Whose opinion is more important, families or societies? What is the parent's proper role? The textbooks contain material that pertained to risky topics. The textbooks apparently challenged what parents believed in. In the fable section, there was a reference to the Bible story of the lion's den, which many parents found offensive. Was the school saying their most fundamental beliefs were myth? Were the textbooks too progressive? As the meeting neared its end, the board decided to adopt the textbooks. Alice Moore and her fundamentalist followers had lost the battle, but they hadn't lost the war.
I believe our boycott today has been even more successful than what we anticipated on.
Reverend Martin Horn was a local fundamentalist minister and a friend of the Moore family. When Alice brought the issue to his attention, he was an instant backer of their cause and became an important figure in the protests. Things were getting out of control. Parents began to keep their children from going to school. Radicals trashed classrooms, and one minister prayed for the school board members to be killed by God. On September 3rd, the first day of school in 1974, it was estimated that at least 20% of the county's students had been kept home. As always, it didn't take long to catch the media's attention, which had previously been covering the desegregation riots in Boston. Mothers began picketing in front of the schools, blocking the way of parents driving their children to class. The only possible way to get there at all, as the buses had either been vandalized beyond repair or their drivers had gone on strike. For almost 2 weeks, there were no buses running at all in Kanawha County. School attendance plummeted. Mining was a huge part of the Kanawha economy, and when leaflets began going around the mines, thousands of workers walked off the job to join the picketing. Kanawha, bit by bit, was shutting down. Local religious leaders urged Kanawha citizens to pull their kids out of school and put them in church-run schools instead. As a result, many kids stopped going to public school for good.
Yes, sir. We'll definitely have the Bible. The Bible will be the main textbook. Each child will have to have a Bible, King James Version of the Bible, to carry with them to class.
Many were suspicious about the fundamentalist motivation. Mildred Holt, an English teacher, was quoted as saying, "I think it was about race. I don't think it was culture. I think it was a pent-up fury about the civil rights movement, and they were afraid of blacks becoming so well-educated they would take their jobs." Miss Holt went on to speak about how she had seen the Ku Klux Klan on the streets. The Ku Klux Klan, as many of us know, were a group that were against blacks, to the point of murdering them. During the textbook war, the Klan held protests and burned crosses. It was wild. A news crew van was vandalized, snipers shot out the windows of school buses, and one man was shot through the heart. Luckily, he survived. Several schools were bombed, and though no one was injured, parents didn't want to send their kids to bombed schools. It was only after the bombings that the school board partially gave in. The textbooks would be taught to students, but only with signed permission slips. Otherwise, they had to sit in the library during class. This, however, did not satisfy the protesters. They continued to keep their kids out of school. At the next school board meeting, chaos broke out. The superintendent ended up with a bloody nose. After this incident, a trial was held for those who had bombed the schools. The Reverend Martin Horn was arrested for a conspiracy to bomb the Campbell Creek School and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. With one of the key members of the protest locked up, there wasn't really anything for the protesters to do. The riots stopped and things quieted down. In the end, it was hard to tell who won. The books were adopted, but many schools and teachers didn't use them, as teachers were afraid of becoming a target for the protesters. Many call the Kanawha County incident the first roots of today's patriotic and religious movements. The Kanawha County debate changed the entire idea of free speech, individual rights, and religious freedom. It challenged the ideas of a generation, ideas about race, politics, and religion. It showed the extent we are willing to go to for our children to be protected. It shows how diplomacy went to the dogs, and how debate can escalate so quickly to violence. It set a precedent for later cases. The fundamental issues at the base of the Kanawha County textbook war are still being debated today, all over the world. These are the ideas that define our nation.
We want the people to know, and we want you to be able to accept.